Welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson. Thanks for joining us. Our topic today is grief, navigating grief during the holidays and finding forgiveness in the wake of grief. My guest is Sam Hodges, president of GriefShare, a church-based grief support program that's being used in thousands of churches across the country. And GriefShare has put out two books. One is called Is My Grief Normal? And the other, Survival Guide, Navigating the Holidays After a Loss. Sam, great to see you. Thank you so much for being with us.
No, thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
So, when you talk about your one book, Is My Grief Normal? That is a great question. And you also discuss in the book a lot about forgiveness in the wake of grief. And a lot of people don't put those two things together, grief and forgiveness. But there's a lot of forgiveness needed when you have suffered a loss, correct?
Yeah. A lot of people who are dealing with the loss of a loved one, they're dealing with a lot more than just the absence of that relationship. A lot of times they're dealing with a lot of unresolved issues. Like, let's say you had a relationship with someone for a number of years and that relationship was strained and that person is gone and there's no opportunity to mend things. Sometimes people have a relationship with someone they love very deeply, and maybe they have an argument and that person dies unexpectedly. And again, there's no way to seek that person's forgiveness. Other times you can feel really guilty just about the decisions that you made leading up to your loved one's death. Maybe you are second guessing some decisions that you made about that person's care or how quickly you got them to the hospital. And that can leave you feeling guilty. And then there are also situations where you might really blame someone else, rightly so, for taking your loved one's life. Maybe your loved one was killed by a drunk driver or murdered in some other way. Or maybe you blame a doctor for some mistakes that he made that led to your loved one's death. And so forgiveness is a really big issue that a lot of people need to work through, and they need to understand who they should forgive and how they should go about it. And those answers aren't always as obvious as you might think.
I think all of these questions are fantastic. All these issues are very personal to me with some of the people I've lost. And I know other people are going through this as well. Let's unpack some of those questions. What do you do if you are feeling unforgiveness towards yourself for having maybe lashing out or having a toxic relationship with someone and they die suddenly and you don't have a chance to repair that, and maybe it was your fault. You didn't treat them well and then they passed. How do you forgive yourself for that?
Yeah, well, what we would encourage people to do is to start by talking to God about it. It's really impossible for you to forgive yourself. When we do something wrong, we really have violated God's standards. And so he's the one that we need to talk with and receive forgiveness from. When we try and forgive ourselves, it starts to put ourselves into a loop of just questioning ourselves. Was I sincere enough? Did I really mean it? Why do I still feel guilty this way? It's always better to focus on the forgiveness that comes from God, because there's a lot more clarity about why God forgives us, because his forgiveness is based on the person and work of Jesus Christ. See, when God forgives us, it's not based on how sorry we feel. It's based on what Jesus has done for us. And by focusing on that, that gives a lot more assurance, because that's one of the things that's really lacking when there's no one to go to and ask, do you forgive me? The person's gone. That opportunity to have that conversation is no more. And so again, there's this uncertainty. But when we realize that, you sinned against that person, you did something that hurt them, but ultimately you violated God's commands, and he's still around, right? And he's the one that you need to engage with. And I think that there's a lot of hope and comfort that comes from realizing, okay, Christ died the death that I should have died, and he lived a life that I couldn't live. And because he did that, I am forgiven. And more than that, one of the interesting things about what Christ does for us is that God declares us righteous. The Bible talks about Christ living the life that we couldn't live, what it's saying is that Christ lived a perfect life for us. And so when we place our faith in what Christ has done for us, then God forgives us of our sin and he credits us with righteousness. And that's how God sees us. And so that's a lot firmer understanding. And we're placing our faith in something that's so much more secure than a bunch of introspection where we're wondering whether or not, have I truly forgiven myself? What does my deceased loved one think about this situation? It's more helpful to focus on what Christ has done for us when we're thinking about forgiveness.
And then you talk about forgiveness when someone else was responsible for the death of your loved one. You mentioned a drunk driver. We saw recently Erica Kirk forgave the person who murdered her husband. When we hold medical professionals responsible, or even family members responsible for allowing our loved one to die, there's so much blame to go around. How do you forgive when someone else, or you believe someone else, is responsible for the death of your loved one?
Yeah, I think one thing that's really helpful is to make a distinction between forgiveness and the consequences, or forgiveness and justice. I think a lot of times people, they feel like, if I forgive, I am minimizing what this person did. I'm somehow excusing it when that person did something that's very, very wrong. And so it's really helpful just to understand that when you're forgiving that person, what you're saying is that you're releasing that person, that you're not going to be bitter. You're not going to demand anything from this person as if they owe you. You're going to release that person and let that go to God. And the only way that it is really possible to do that, especially when you're dealing with someone who is responsible for your loved one's death, that really has to be motivated by the kindness that God has shown to us. The Bible tells us that we forgive because God has forgiven us. And that's the thing that we need to keep in mind. No matter what someone has done to us, no matter how horrible it is, our offenses toward a perfect and holy God are far worse. And yet he forgives us, and he is so merciful and he is so kind. And so that is the motivation to forgive. It's what God has done for us. And if we can keep that in mind, that can help us to forgive other people who are responsible for our loved ones' deaths, whether or not they acknowledge their wrongdoing. We can still forgive them. That doesn't make it easy, but it's very important to do it, because when you don't forgive, it has a negative effect on you. It makes you a bitter person. That can harm other relationships with other people. When you're bitter, it affects your health. It increases your chances of heart disease, weakens your immune system. It causes you to have high blood pressure, increases your heart rate. There's so many negative effects that come from staying in this state of bitterness. And so, research has found that when people forgive, their health improves. And so there are lots of reasons to do it, but ultimately, we want to forgive because as God's people, we have experienced forgiveness from God.
And we know that this is something that God has commanded us to do, yet some people intellectually know they should forgive, but they just have difficulty doing it. When we come back, we're going to take a quick break and continue our discussion with Sam Hodges with GriefShare about just exactly how we go about forgiving. Stay with us for Healthy Living. Welcome back. We are continuing our discussion with Sam Hodges, president of GriefShare, a church-based grief support program that recently put out the book, Is My Grief Normal? And Sam, we were talking before the break about the importance of forgiveness. It is a commandment, of course. And it reminds me in many ways of the command to love one another. We all know we're supposed to do it. We all know we're supposed to forgive, but it's very difficult to do. How does one go about forgiving?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And that's one of the reasons why community is so important. We need other people who sometimes are a few steps down the road further than we are in our grief recovery, in their grief recovery, because they can encourage us and they can help us to see the benefits of forgiving. And so talking with other people about what you're going through and why it's so difficult can be helpful. Another thing that's really, really helpful is really taking your questions and your hesitations about forgiveness to God. He does not mind a conversation where you're saying, I know I ought to forgive, but I really don't feel like doing that. So, one thing we like to say is that we heal when we process what we think and feel in light of what God has revealed. And that's what you see in scripture. People talk about Psalms of lament, and you see all the times people come to God with these questions about why. And, God, this seems so unfair. This seems so unjust. But not only are they crying out and talking about how difficult things are and how they don't understand and they need help, they're also reflecting upon and stating aloud what God has promised, what he has said about himself, what he says about their situations. And so what we found, this works really well in our GriefShare groups, is that when people get in groups, when they hear what God has to say, and when they have the opportunity, again, to process what they're thinking and process what they're feeling in light of what God says, transformation begins to happen. And you start to see that God agrees with you that this was wrong. You start to see that God has a plan to address it. You start to see that God understands why you feel the way you do, and that he loves you, and that he wants to guide you and help you as you're walking through this process of learning to forgive. So I would say, first and foremost, talk to God about any apprehension that you have about forgiving, and see what his word has to say. And again, the promises that he lays out in his word about the benefits of forgiving others.
Do you think there are people who don't realize that they're harboring unforgiveness because they know they should forgive, and so they intellectually say, "Oh yes, I forgive that person," but they really don't? Are there any symptoms of unforgiveness? You talked about bitterness before.
Yeah, some symptoms of unforgiveness might be avoidance. If you have a person that has passed away, and you might want to avoid other family members. If you had a negative relationship with a family member who passed away, maybe these other family members had a good relationship with that person and you don't, or you didn't, and you might want to avoid them because when they get together, maybe around the holidays or at a funeral, they're going to celebrate this person. They're going to talk about this person as if he was just so wonderful, but that wasn't your experience. So that can be one indicator. I think another thing that could be an indicator that you are holding on to bitterness is if you don't have the ability to really talk about the person, if it causes you a bunch of stress, if it is something that you have a hard time thinking about. Something else that can be an indicator that you're dealing with unresolved bitterness is it pushes you away from the Lord. The Bible tells us that, when we're dealing with sin in our hearts, when there are unresolved issues, that blocks our relationship with God. And so if you feel yourself becoming distant, you're not wanting to get in the Word, and that could be another indicator. But yeah, lots of signs. And that's why we want to keep short accounts and talk to God about any kind of bitterness that we're dealing with.
A lot of people, when they did see Erica Kirk so soon after her husband was murdered, offer forgiveness for the young man. A lot of people thought, well, that was fast. How long does it take to forgive someone?
It depends. It really depends. We've talked to people, and it's taken years for them to get to the point where they're able to forgive. Other people, like Erica Kirk, they're able to do it very quickly. And I think it depends a lot on just where a person is coming from, what they understand about God, and just how much they've been forgiven. That's one thing that factors into it. Something else is just the severity of the offense. There are all sorts of factors that are going to affect it, but there's no timetable that we can just look at and say, well, you lost somebody this particular way at this particular age, and so it's only going to be 3 years or 6 months. It just takes time, and it just depends on the person.
Every situation is different. All right, we're going to take another break and be right back with Sam Hodges. The book is called Is My Grief Normal? When we come back, we're going to talk about navigating grief through the holidays. Stay with us. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We are talking with Sam Hodges, president of GriefShare, a church-based grief support program that recently put out the book Survival Guide, Navigating the Holidays After a Loss. And boy, Sam, doesn't this hit home for so many of us? The American Psychiatric Association said almost half of all the people they polled said that having grief memories and dealing with grief is one of the #1 stressors during the holidays. And it doesn't have to be a recent death or a recent loss. And so many of us, it's difficult to get through the holidays thinking about the people we used to share them with.
Yeah, it really is. When you've lost someone, and the holidays always bring that back. I mean, the holidays are just about family. You see it on television and in the ads. You know, people are showing up at church with their families, and it's often a reminder of who you've lost. And especially in the months following a loved one's death, the holidays can be particularly painful and really confusing because it's hard to know how to approach the holidays. A lot of times you might not even feel like celebrating, but everybody else around you is. And you don't want to feel like you're discouraging other people. You don't want to feel like a Debbie Downer, so to speak. And so the holidays can be very, very confusing. They can be very, very painful because some of the things that you used to love to do and find so much joy in actually bring pain now. And so often it's really important to figure out, okay, how am I going to approach these holidays differently? And how am I going to do it in a way that I can actually survive?
So, can you give some tips for those of us who really do struggle during the holidays thinking about loved ones who are gone?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to do is to give yourself the freedom to create new traditions. You don't have to do everything that you used to do during the holidays. Because again, some of the things that you used to do are painful. And some of the things that you used to do, you may not even have the energy or sometimes even the resources to do those things as you did in the past. And so you want to feel free to do new things, talk to your family members, and figure out, what are some ways that we can go about celebrating the holidays that might be different. I remember we talked to a person who went on a cruise to do something different during the holidays as opposed to celebrating at home. But you can get really, really creative. The other thing that you really want to do is make a plan. A lot of times during the holidays, you're invited to Christmas parties, or maybe you're invited over to someone's house for Thanksgiving. And that seems like that's just too much. But sometimes you can have a plan to help you navigate those events. And so that can be something as simple as having a buddy to go with you, and you can leave at a certain time without having to stay the whole time. Or you can let people know ahead of time, yeah, I'm coming for Thanksgiving, but I'm only going to stay for an hour. Or you can let people know, I may or not show up that day. I'll have to let you know the day of. Or you can make plans to honor your loved one during the holiday. Because sometimes when you get together with people during the holiday season, um, you want to talk about your loved one and you feel like maybe you're imposing upon them or you're making things awkward by talking about your loved one. But by talking to the host or talking with other family members to say, this evening we're going to light a candle and talk about Uncle Mitch, or we're going to say a prayer and say just how thankful we are for cousin Barbara. Like, you can do things like that. And by planning to do things like that, it can make the holidays a lot less stressful.
All right, we're going to take one final break and be right back with Sam Hodges with GriefShare. The book is called Survival Guide, Navigating the Holidays After a Loss. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We are continuing our discussion with Sam Hodges, president of GriefShare, which just put out the book Survival Guide, Navigating the Holidays After a Loss. And we should point out, Sam, that GriefShare is a church-based grief support system. How can people find out about GriefShare and maybe if they don't already have something like that in their church, get it started?
Yeah, the place to go is griefshare.org. When you go to griefshare.org, you can find out how to find a group, join a group, or you can find out how to get a group started in your church. And if you visit and you're looking for a group, you just got to put in your zip code or your city and state, and you'll find groups all around the world that are meeting. They're meeting in person and online. And this time of year, we also have GriefShare Surviving the Holidays events. These are one-night events that many of our GriefShare churches put on. They teach a lot of principles about how to survive the holidays. And so if you're looking for help or support, I'd encourage you to visit griefshare.org/surviving, griefshare.org/surviving. And that's where you can find a survival guide as well. And if you're interested in the GriefShare Is My Grief Normal book, the best place to find that is griefshare.org/grief questions, griefshare.org/grief questions.
So we've done a lot of talking about what to do if you yourself are grieving. What should we do when we know someone near us is grieving? They don't seem to be talking about it, but you know they must be thinking about that person. Should you say anything or not?
Yeah, you do want to say something. A lot of times, people who are dealing with grief, um, they don't want to bother other people, or sometimes they don't have the energy. And so you just want to let people know that you're available and let them know what you're available to do. And sometimes you might need to keep reminding them, but letting them know that you're willing to do more than just bring food. Once they become clear about what they might need, that you're willing to do whatever they need. So just let people know, and just let people know that you care. And one of the other things that's really important is when sometimes you don't know what you should say, and sometimes you don't have to say anything. It's just so much better for you just to be present and sit with people. So talk to people, find out what they need, but don't feel like you've got to have all the answers. Sometimes it's just good for you just to be present with them.
Great advice. Well, Sam, thank you so much for being with us today and for your organization's outstanding work. Once again, the books are called Is My Grief Normal? And Survival Guide, Navigating the Holidays After a Loss. Thank you so much once again for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
And thanks to you for being with us on this edition of Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson, and we'll see you again next week.